preservation method because it preserves flavors and it locks in freshness. So we definitely want that as we try to prepare healthy meals for our family. This is super important. You want to store your food in the proper with the proper tools. So here, everybody knows about freezer bags. However, some people may say, "Oh, all Ziploc bags are made equal." They are not. This is a regular Ziploc bag. It is much thinner than a freezer bag. A freezer bag is designed with thicker plastic to preserve foods and keep a lot of the moisture from getting into the foods. So you want to choose a thicker freezer bag and make sure that you're freezing with a freezer bag. And one of the ways that you know you're using a freezer bag, it has like the little label on it. I love that. If you have the rooms in your freezer, you can use these little stackable plastics. Yep, and you can use glass that is made to be in the freezer. Keep at least an inch of space because liquids, they expand at least 10% more when they're frozen. So in this jar, we go leave that space for the food to expand. And the same for this container so that it won't crack or explode. To me, that's one of the very important tips. The next thing you want to do, choose quality products. Choose quality foods. Some people will try to freeze foods just because they're almost expired. No, you want it. Remember what we said, freezing locks in freshness. So me, I'm a baker, so I love frozen fruits because I get more freshness out of the frozen fruits, especially when they're off season. So choose quality fruit. Make sure that the freezer is set properly. Now, most freezers, if you look at your inside the freezer, it'll tell you the proper setting from the manufacturer. But if you set it to 0, and it may say this on your refrigerator, it will give your food a longer, it will preserve your food longer in the freezer. Never freeze foods that's super hot. You want to put them in the freezer when it's at room temperature, because when you do this, it takes longer to freeze and you're kind of taking away from the quality of the food. We want to make sure, especially when we're doing meats, we want to wrap our food very tight. Show you the proper way to get the air out. Now, I like to use a food saver, but most of us don't have a food saver, so we have to manually get the air out. So we have a couple of techniques that we use. Sure that your food is really dry. So when you put in wet food in the freezer, what you're doing is kind of inviting a party for moisture to come in and just for freezer burn. You're begging freezer burn to happen. So make sure that your food is dry. I think all of us have our little unique ways of how we defrost. Now, safety is also a part of this class. So we want to make sure that our food is safe to consume. Some people will run their foods under hot water. That's not necessarily good. Number one, you're cooking the food, and number two, you're also destroying the quality of food. So you want to either use cold water, let it sit for 20-30 minutes, and then empty the water in another 20-30 minutes. You do it in 20-30 minute increments. Most people will say put it in the refrigerator overnight. Who has time to wait overnight for some meat? So most of us, we just put it in some water, but make sure that your water is cold. I have a very cool tip though. You can take one of these now and just put your meats or whatever you're unthawing on one of these, because this is a great heat conductor. Even though that's cold, this is gonna help your food unthaw at a faster rate. So use one of these next time you try. Okay? And then when you get into freezing veggies, you can't just throw veggies in the freezer. Don't do that. You have to do something called blanching. You get into fruits. You can just throw them in there, but you don't want to just throw fruits in the bag because they will clump and kind of coagulate and get all like little lumpy. So it's a really cool thing if you can just take your fruits, especially berries. Berries, you really need to do this with berries. You just lay them all individually on a cookie sheet, baking sheet, and you can do what we call flash freezing for about an hour. So you put it in the freezer for an hour and let them become individually frozen, and then you put them in here, and it won't, that'll stop the kind of clumping of your foods. And the other thing is, you can't really freeze everything. Some people think you can freeze any kind of food. Stay away from freezing soft cheeses. I froze some cream cheese, and when we took it out, it tasted terrible, and it was the texture was just horrible. When you're getting into dairies, with the exception of butter, butter freezes well, milk freezes well, but cream, heavy cream, not so good. Any soft cheese, hard cheeses are fine, but when you get into anything with high water content, and this goes for veggies too, like leafy veggies, there's no need to freeze those, because you're not going to have a quality product. Okay, now some of the herbs, there is a really cool way to freeze herbs. You can do that. You take an ice tray and make little ice cubes, and you can use some olive oil or your favorite cooking oil or some type of fat, and you put your herbs in there, and you can take out those little cubes and put them in soups and sauces as you go. So that is, but once you freeze them in the ice tray, you want to still put them in the bag, because they will become freezer burn if you just leave them in the ice tray and not have them covered or sealed tightly. So that's very important, making sure that we choose something that's going to have a tight seal. That's the important part of having the proper storage containers. Okay, as far as freezing, this is what we did for our French fries. I open these, and we're going to hurry up and get these back in the freezer, because see, they're losing. They're kind of defrosting as we're speaking. So when you're doing, and I want you to, when I showed you these, they were kind of flat. It's very important to keep your veggies flat if you can, if you're not storing them in a jar or glass. And some things you will store kind of at a higher height, but it's cool to keep them for stacking purposes, and you get a better quality when you do that, when you keep them low. So what I'm gonna do, the enemy to freezing, mostly moisture. That's the main thing. So we're gonna squeeze all that air out. And here's another unique way that people will do it. Now, rounder veggies, the ones that's harder to lay flat, there's something called the straw method. Now, some people might freak out on this. After you squeeze all this, if you don't have a vacuum sealer, let's do old school. You put that little straw in there, you zip it up as far as you can, leave a little hole, you squeeze it out, and you just gonna suck that air out. Do it real quick. And that's an old school way of doing it. That's called the straw method. So we're gonna go ahead and put these back in the freezer. So I'm gonna go ahead and flatten them out. See, they're already frozen, but I want to get that air out of them. That's very important for me to get that air out. But you see the color? The color is there because we blanched them. That's very important. You stop the enzymes. I mean, you have to blanch them, especially if you leave the skin on, because most people think that bacteria won't grow in the freezer. It will, and people can catch the same things they do if you can something the wrong way. You can get that same result if you freeze the wrong way. So you want to make sure that we stop the bacteria, the growth of the bacteria in there. Now, I actually heard a lady say that her food can last 5 years in the freezer. I wouldn't trust that. That's just me. I would not trust it. So here are some strawberries I did in May. I did these strawberries in May. They were fresh. So we know strawberry season is in June. So they were super sweet. So these are what I use to make my strawberry cake. And all I did was get the air out of them. And I put a little, and I probably could have used a smaller bag on this. And I just put some tape on it so that I can have them stacked a little bit better. I'm hoping that today's course that you've learned some tips and tricks about freeze class. It's also food preservation. We're going to talk about food dehydration. So thank you so much for joining us.